You won't believe. George, furious, grabbed anything nearby to attack the cat, which fled through the door as George felt heartache at the fish cries. She called again to break the good news to George that the cat's owner had been found and was willing to pay for all the vet bills, planning to take the kitty. George couldn't contain his rage, yelling the cat died in another accident, and smashing the phone. Confronted by his mother's anger, George made a noisy phone call. The next day, he buried the fish sadly, caught by Melissa. Noticing George's low spirits, Melissa happily told him Robert was popular, prompting George to verify if Robert was just an impersonator. George made up his mind to track Robert daily, and bright and early. He took his post lurking downstairs from his building, waiting and timing Robert doing his more. George didn't expect Robert's strong counter-surveillance skills. As George dozed, Robert caught him, identifying him as a cop. Robert interrogated George about his stalking, and George awkwardly replied he was just trying to make a friend, to which Robert shot him a look of disdain. George was forced into unwanted surgery and struggled to stand during recovery. Determined to exact revenge, George plotted to stake out Robert's hotel to figure out how to sneak into his room. Meanwhile, as George was lost in self-reflection, he failed to notice his colleague Sally's care. She once stitched his wound and left a key. Unable to reach George, Sally decided to use her key to let herself into his place, only to be greeted by utter chaos. Suddenly, a cat that George had previously scared off darted in. Thinking she had found a stray, Sally decided to tame. However, she soon found that this little kitty was not easily intimidated and had to turn on the vacuum to finally scare it. To her surprise, Sally stumbled upon George's cross necklace tossed in the trash and suspected something was off, deciding to have a chat with. Completely oblivious, George followed a hotel cleaner into a room and somehow ended up tying them up. Ingeniously, he snagged the universal room key and sneaked into Robert's room, handing him a knife to cut himself free. As events unfolded, Robert's phone buzzed and George shot a quick text, eagerly watching for his reaction. When Robert didn't react right away, instead making snarky comments, George became more convinced in his suspicions. Upon receiving the text, Robert wondered who had gotten their hands on his phone number and began scanning the area. Deep down, Robert's mind was racing, and he quietly slipped into the storage room to check if only George was there. George realized the jig was up and quickly tossed his phone into a bucket just as Robert stormed over and kicked him, beginning his search. Robert searched everywhere but found no phone, so he dialed his number, yet no ring sounded. Robert misunderstood George's intentions, not bothering to apologize, and simply walked off. George retrieved Melissa's phone from the bucket, sneakily stashing it back, and, thankfully, Melissa dropped the issue. Melissa even shared a little hack with George, put a wet phone in a bowl of rice for a while. George happily took her advice. Just then, his mother called and was chatting with the strange old man, leaving both in low spirits. George was speechless. His mother looked scared. He stopped probing and even brought up his girlfriend's visit. He hastily hung up, prompting George to mistakenly think it was Melissa calling. But it was Melissa, making him think it was a motherly hallucination. Then he and Melissa broke into the manager's home. The manager once saw George checking into the hotel. Knowing the police reward, he couldn't resist betraying George. Together, Melissa and George bound the incapacitated manager, while she sat back to enjoy George's performance. George sliced, enjoyed the boss plight, used Robert's board knife, and left some blood. In the end, they framed the boss, and George took his fish as a parting move. Meanwhile, police met in a conference room to discuss the hotel owner's death. George sneaked into the office and texted Robert, causing chaos. Robert instantly exploded in rage, unsure who sent the text, but he took it all out on George. Everyone was baffled. George, green-faced, was scolded as the trash can rolled out silently. Back in the storage room, he prepared for a grand scheme, but was caught by Sally snooping around his phone. Anxious to cover his tracks, George put on a natural face, while Sally casually mentioned her plans to return to the nursing world. George remained unusually calm. Sally's curiosity grew, and she decided to follow him, wondering if he was really in trouble, leading to an unsuspected twist. In a bid to teach Robert a lesson, George plotted to kidnap him, setting off with a briefcase in hand. Lurking in the shadows, he lay in wait for Robert to return home, ready to knock him out with a frying pan. But as Robert awoke, quick on the uptake, he spotted George and poised to shoot. George seized a trusty weapon and knocked the gun from Robert's hand, sparking an epic duel between them. At that moment, Sally arrived at the door, anxious about whether her intrusion would add to the chaos. Hesitating, Sally decided against knocking, and just as George was about to pass out, he accidentally knocked over a nearby. Seizing the chance, George smashed Robert with the glass, leaving Sally dumbfounded before he handed her a parking ticket he had pocketed. After getting Robert's fingerprints on the ticket, George stashed it in a sealed bag. Little did he know, this ticket would be a crucial piece of evidence for him. George tossed Robert into an empty room, but when he got home, he found the feisty cat having a standoff with his four fierce fish that had mysteriously returned. Full of vengeance, George cleverly used the sound of his keys to lure the cat closer, dagger in hand, ready to teach the little furball a lesson. However, this cold-blooded demon decided to spare the cat, realizing there were new little fish in the tank, so he let it off the hook this time.